Hey everybody, Brianna here. I hope everybody is doing good. I hope everyone is staying safe and enjoying their rest, enjoying some time off their summer in a responsible way. And today I have the opportunity to just bring everybody a little bit of encouragement. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Today I'm giving a devotional titled Trusting in the Fire, and it's going to be based on the book of Daniel chapter 3. If you haven't read the book of Daniel already, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a really good book. Chapter 3 is, I'm sure that you've heard this story. If you haven't, I would highly, recommend that you read it. But I'm going to give you a little bit of summary of kind of what's going on. So basically in the book of Daniel, what happens is that Israel as a nation gets captured by the Babylonians. The king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, he asked for specific people, so like young Jewish men, to appoint them as leaders in their community. Basically, one of those people is Daniel, and then the other three are these young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in chapter 3, what's going on is that King Nebuchadnezzar, basically, he builds this statue of gold. He wants to give this whole celebration so that people can come see the statue that he built, or that he had other people build, and so that they can come worship it. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they come to the ceremony, and whenever they find out that the king of Babylon wants them to bow down and worship this statue, they're like, no, like, we're not going to do this. Like, we listened to what you had to say. We obey you because you're the king. But what you're asking us to do is just not right. Like, we're not going to bow down before any other God besides our God, the one true God, right? So Nebuchadnezzar, he gets like really upset, and in verse 15 he says, I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. So to me, this is just such a powerful story of the trust and the faith that these three young men had in their God, had in the fact that they knew that he was going to protect them. And they also knew that even if he didn't, right, even if, the time came and they were going to be punished and they did, not make it and they didn't survive, that God was still God, and they weren't going to give up their morals and beliefs, just, for the sake of living. And that's just so powerful, because that is such a difficult decision, especially for three young men to make, right? Like, that's something that obviously was a reflection of a pre-existing intimate relationship that these men had with their God. And if you notice something, is that they didn't pray, whenever Nebuchadnezzar said this, they didn't pray, oh, God is going to free us from the fire. They didn't pray, oh, God isn't going to allow us to go through the fire, right? So they had such an intimate pre-existing relationship with God that they understood and trusted that even if they were put in the fire, even if they were to be, even if they were to be exposed to this type of situation, that God would protect them and that God could protect them. And that trust was just so great that they were able to stand up for what they believed, and God was able to honor that, right? And so at this point, Nebuchadnezzar is just furious, right? the word in verse 19 says that his face distorted with rage, and he commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered his strongest men to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace, to tie them up and throw them in. So here we see that God, he allowed these men to go through these difficulties, even more so than maybe a normal person that was being punished. He allowed them to go through this fire that was 7 times hotter than the usual punishment. And you're like, okay, why? Like, why did God let them go through this? Why, was like God not on their side? Was God, trying to play a trick or something, right? And you're just kind of like, I don't understand, what's going on. And I'm sure, kind of maybe they were in a similar position. Maybe they were like, oh, okay, like this is gonna happen, like, oh my goodness, right? But you can see that from their trust, they understood that even though this was happening, their God was still God. And then you see later on that in the fire, right, these men, even though the men that threw them in were consumed by the fire, these 3 young men were not alone in the fire. So they get thrown in, right, to this super hot fire, and people notice that there's someone else in there with them. So there's a 4th person, and they're like, who is this other person? Like, we only threw in 3 people. And so, like, everyone is super confused. They're like, what's going on? So they take the men out of the furnace, right, out of this oven or fire or whatever. And they see that in verse 27, it says, then the high officers, officials, governors, advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their head was singed, their cloth was not scorched, and they didn't smell like smoke. So this is just so wild, right? That these men were like in the fire, literally in the middle of the fire, and God protected them to the point where there was literally no evidence of them having gone through this situation physically, right? So what does this tell us? Was that God allowed them to go through this situation to multiply their trust, right? If somebody comes through for you, and if you ask them to do a favor and they, do it, then for the next situation, you're like, okay, I know I can count on this person to come through and do this favor for me, right? So in the same way, God multiplied their trust, because now they knew that there was literally no situation that they would go through that God wouldn't be there for them, that God wouldn't protect them through. And it multiplied the trust of the people that weren't even involved in the situation, that weren't even in the fire. And you see here later on in verse 3 that Nebuchadnezzar is like, everybody has to bow down to the God of these men. And so God was glorified through this difficult situation that these men had gone through. And sometimes, we as people, we go through difficult situations and we're like, God, why am I going through this? Why did I do to deserve this? Why is 2020 so chaotic? Everybody, whenever they talk about this year, they're like, oh my gosh, such a joke, right? And it's true, it's been really crazy for sure. And we're like, okay, God, why did you allow me to live through this? Why is everything going like to chaos, right? But instead, we need to take these situations that God is allowing us to go through, these fires, so to speak, right? And understand what God is doing and trust that He is in control of these situations. Trust that He can protect us, and trust that, even, whatever happens, God is still God, and God is using this time for His glory and for His praise and for His honor, so that when we go through difficult situations, we can now be reflections of God's glory. And whenever people ask, like, hey, how are you doing, like, through a situation, like, yes, it's been hard, but I understand and I know that I have a God so good that, He's protected me, a God so good that He's helping me, a God so good that He has a plan and a purpose for my life, and that's why He's allowing me to go through this. And so now I want you guys, as I'm coming to an end of this little devotional, I just want to encourage you guys to reflect. So maybe you feel like you're going through a dire situation Maybe you feel like you're in the middle of chaos. Maybe being at home with your family has been hard. Maybe not being able to see your friends has been hard. Maybe global issues and social issues have been hard. And maybe, everything that's going on right now is hard. Or maybe you have a family member who's sick and it's been really hard. And you just feel like there's so many situations that you can't control. And maybe we can't control, what fire we get put into or what situations we go through. But what we can control is how we react to them and how we trust in God and who we put our trust in. And in Philippians 4:4-6, it says, "Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for what He has already done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds everything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Jesus Christ." So as we're going through these fires and as we're, experiencing these difficulties in our lives, whether it be, this year or next year or, 20 years down the line, we can understand and trust that even in these situations, we don't have to worry about anything, that every anxiety on our heart, that we can pray about it and we can put it before God and He will fill us with His peace. And even though it is normal to worry as humans, I do it, I'm sure you do it, I'm sure everybody does it, right? But we can really have this peace that surpasses our understanding, that we can rely on when we're in a time of difficulty, when we're in the fire. We know that He's there with us. We know that we're not alone. We know that we are side by side with a God who loves us and who gave everything for us. So whether it be your family or your friends or school or social issues, and you're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to, whatever it is that you're going through, pray about it and put it before Him and let God kind of take that burden from you so that He can fill you with His peace. And lastly, in Philippians 4:9, it says, "Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you." So yes, we should pray about it, but we also should act on what we can control. Act on putting the things that God has taught us into practice. And that way that we can trust that as we stand, on what we believe, and as we stand through difficult situations and as we stand in different fires, we can pray and we can act and we can trust that God will be in the midst of every fire we go through, protecting us, leading us, and guiding us in the right direction. So I hope you guys, I hope that encouraged somebody out there today. And I just want to say that I miss everyone and I can't wait to see you guys back in church. And also, I hope you guys are staying super safe. I know it's a really difficult time and it's been a while that we've been going through this, but please, please, please make sure that you're following the health and safety recommendations. Make sure you're wearing a mask. Make sure you're staying safe. For yourself, for others. Make sure that you're really focusing on your relationship with God right now. Make sure that you're praying, reading your Bible, reading a Christian book, listening to worship music, all of these things, and listening to the youth services, and just allowing yourself to use this time to be productive and to really multiply your trust in God. And so I just really, can't wait to see everybody, and I hope this was a good devotional that somebody enjoyed and, somebody got something from. And yes, love you all. Bye.